Joe Bandel's oak matrix 10-degree ladder posits that the fundamental engine of human evolution is not a war between opposing forces, but a relentless, recursive, and loving embrace between chaos and order. This framework, detailed extensively in his recent releases like the 2026 book, The OAK Matrix Unleashed, and his earlier work, Dance of Opposites, completely re-engineers a classic esoteric hierarchy into a modern psychological map of cosmic maturity. We are examining the architecture of this specific developmental system today. Bandel takes the traditional 0 equals 0 to 10 equals 1 grade ladder, a numerical structure originally formalized by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in the late 19th century to map the Kabbalistic tree of life, and strips away the Victorian occultism to reveal a general field theory of human consciousness.
The sheer ambition of the model is striking because it attempts to solve a profound Western philosophical problem. The prevailing cultural paradigm treats duality as a zero-sum battlefield. We pit science against spirituality, the individual against the collective, or order against chaos. Bandel rejects that outright. His premise is that duality never conflicts. It only generates higher unity through held tension. To map this out, he relies on a repeating 4-part micro-pattern that operates at every single degree of his 10-step ladder. Once a person grasps this single recursive loop, the entire progression unlocks.
The mechanics of that loop rely heavily on gendered language, which immediately raises a flag for modern readers. The pattern categorizes the outward linear, expansive, and chaos-embracing movement as the male path, while the inward, cyclical, containing, and order-holding movement is the female path. Relying on such archetypal labels carries immense cultural baggage and risks limiting the framework to traditional biological or social roles, rather than expanding human potential.
Bandel is pulling directly from tantric and hermetic traditions, where those terms designate energetic polarities, not biological mandates or sociological gender roles. Think of it more like the positive and negative terminals of a battery, or the relationship between a river and its banks. The male polarity represents the drive to climb, plunge, and inject new, often chaotic vision into a system. It is the sacrificial movement toward freedom. The female polarity represents the capacity to flow, nurture, connect, and hold that chaos within the structured boundary. It is the matrix, or the womb, that contains the energy. The magic of Bandel's system occurs in the 3rd step of the micropattern, which is the alchemical interaction. The male energy pours into the female container. The female receives and transforms it, and a reciprocal energy exchange builds up immense pressure.
That buildup of pressure leads directly into the concept of chaos as a generative force. Bandel explicitly draws on the work of Ilya Prigozhin, the Nobel-winning chemist who developed the theory of dissipative structures. Prigozhin demonstrated that when a chemical system is pushed far from equilibrium by a massive influx of energy, it experiences profound chaos, but at a critical threshold called a bifurcation point, it spontaneously reorganizes into a more complex, stable state. Bandel applies this exact scientific principle to human psychology. The friction between the expansive male plunge and the containing female order creates a crisis. The system holds the tension until it leaps to the next degree.
That leap is the 4th step of the loop. The crisis of resistance gives way to resonance, and the individual achieves a higher integration of those two forces. The labels for the archetypes evolve as a person climbs the ladder, from basic logic and body sensuality in the lower grades to the divine child and the goddess priestess in the highest grades, but the underlying energetic roles never flip. The outward movement always seeks to expand, and the inward movement always seeks to contain and transform. The oak tree serves as the central anchoring symbol for the entire system because it visually represents this process. The acorn contains the potential, the roots plunge chaotically into the dark earth, the trunk holds the structural order in concentric rings, and the crown expands outward into the sky.
The structure of the ladder itself scales fractally, mirroring the historical divisions of the Golden Dawn system. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn divided its grades into 3 distinct orders: the outer order, the inner order of the Rosae Rubiae et Aurae Crucis, and an invisible third order. Bandel retains this tripartite division, but maps it onto human psychological and biographical development. The lower degrees, spanning from 0 equals 0 to 4 equals 7, operate on a microscale. They represent personal, egoic, and relational development, roughly correlating to the journey from childhood through young adulthood. Those early stages are where the individual is essentially constructing the ego. The person is learning how to navigate personal desires, establish boundaries, and manage the friction of immediate relationships. The stakes are localized. If you fail to contain the chaos of a new career or a new romantic relationship, the fallout is restricted to your immediate personal life. The progression is entirely about building a functional identity that can handle the alchemical exchange of giving and receiving without shattering. The transition to the middle degrees from 5 equals 6 to 7 equals 4 marks a severe shift in the magnitude of the consequences. This correlates to a midlife reckoning. The focus expands from the personal ego to a karmic, collective human scale. Bandel introduces the concept of service as the only viable path beyond ego death. The individual must transition from building their own identity to acting as a midwife for others' development. The karmic logic becomes intense at this level. Bandel aligns his concept of consequence with Dewey Larson's physical theory of reciprocal motion. There is no external punishing deity in the oak matrix. There is only reciprocal balance. Early choices echo louder in the middle degrees. Positive integration returns systemic support, while a failure to hold the tension returns loss and pain. The individual in these middle grades takes on a profound burden because they are no longer just managing their own internal polarities. They are actively attempting to hold the container for the chaos of their community or society. That burden amplifies immensely when the latter reaches the upper degrees, running from 8 equals 3 to 10 equals 1. In the original Golden Dawn system, these were the grades of Magister Templi, Magus, and Ipsissimus, theoretical states of mastery associated with the secret chiefs. Bandel frames these as cosmic, non-dual states of divine presence, corresponding to elder wisdom and transcendence. However, he subverts the expected triumphant narrative by injecting a distinct shadow tone into these final stages. There is no victorious apotheosis where the initiate becomes an untouchable god. The shadow tone is crucial because it grounds the entire esoteric framework in harsh reality. The grade of Magister Templi is defined by an agonizing sorrow, stemming from the realization that the world often violently resists the very transformation the Magister is trying to midwife. The Magus experiences intense canvas resistance, the understanding that the fabric of reality pushes back against their creative will. Finally, the ultimate state of Ipsissimus is characterized not by supreme dominance, but by absolute crushing humility. The individual possesses immense spiritual power, but recognizes that true wholeness means operating as a completely surrendered servant to the systemic balance. The recurring motif of the abyss is central to that realization. The abyss is not a single gateway that one crosses once and for all. Bandel interprets the abyss as a recurring threshold that must be crossed multiple times at increasingly higher resolutions. Every time the person transitions from the personal to the karmic scale, or from the karmic to the cosmic scale, they must let go of the structured container that kept them safe in the previous iteration. They have to plunge back into the raw chaos. It requires a staggering amount of what Bandel describes as tantric-like energy buildup. He clarifies that this is an emotional and spiritual foreplay, not necessarily sexual. The individual must cultivate an intense, vibrating charge between the male drive for expansion and the female capacity for containment. When that energy hits the bifurcation point at the edge of the abyss, the old ego structure shatters. If the reciprocal balance holds, the individual rematerializes on the other side of the abyss at a higher degree of resonance. The final state is described as the simultaneous embodiment of childlike divine freedom and the grounded, encompassing love of the goddess priestess within a single being. By stripping away the elaborate Victorian rituals of the Golden Dawn and distilling the grades into this single recursive polarity embrace loop, Bandel has created a highly compressed, almost algorithmic model of spiritual evolution. It demands that we stop trying to conquer chaos and instead learn to host it within increasingly resilient containers of order. If this exploration of the oak matrix and the mechanics of human development challenged your perspective, send this episode to a friend who is fascinated by the intersection of psychology and esoteric philosophy.